Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Thursday, August 9th, 2018, and you've reached the No Name Cinema Society. It is our classic movie discussion. This past March, we did a special episode spotlighting the Oscar race from 1942, which was 75 Oscars ago. Throughout this year, 2018, I've been making my co-host, Drunk Davey, watch some of the bigger films from that project, and tonight is an example of that. We're going to review Pride of the Yankees for you tonight from 1942, and I'm dressed appropriately. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jonathan Betzler, and I've brought Humphrey Bogart back from 1942 with me as well as we celebrate this film. I'm going to get straight into the intros because we've got a new member with us tonight. But first, the old member, who's sort of like my overbearing mother who won't let go of me, her prodigal son, Drunk Davey. How are you?
It was a good one.
You like that intro?
Yeah, not bad, not bad.
I thought you might. How do you like my outfit is the bigger question.
So an odd thing for a Phillies fan to wear.
That might be true, but we're reviewing the movie. I mean, for what it's worth, Davey, our movie isn't from the 70s. I don't know about your 70s shirt there. That seems like a new look for you. And without further ado, it's time to introduce our newest member, our second ever female panelist, and also my second AD, Megan Ashley Young is here with us.
Hi.
Welcome, Megan.
Thank you.
Davey has always wondered what it's like to work for me, so maybe you can help him out.
It's an absolute roller coaster of fun times.
When people need a job, they say things.
Fine, if that's the way you all want to be. So, all right, real quick, let me show you. This is our schedule for this, our 50th set of episodes. We are celebrating our 50th set of episodes, and it all started on Thursday, August 2nd, with a review of Mission Impossible Fallout. This past Monday, August 6th, Alex was with us to discuss the indie documentary The Square from 2013. Tonight, of course, Thursday, August 9th, we're going to review Pride of the Yankees from 1942. And this upcoming Monday will be our Sound Off, our freeform segment, in which I'm going to introduce a new segment. Alex is going to do a second run, and I am supposed to count down the top 5 sports biopics of all time based on our discussion of this, Pride of the Yankees. And we'll see on Monday whether or not Pride of the Yankees makes the list. Now, one of our traditions on the show, we used to have many people that drank in the show, but less and less. Now it's just me. I'm drinking Fat Tire tonight. I had to start before we started because I was really thirsty and I needed a drink after today. Megan, Davey doesn't drink on the show anymore. Are you drinking anything with me?
I don't have anything with me, so I'm not drinking with you. But I'm drinking spirit.
She's known to drink with me in the past, but tonight is not the night. But for what it's, Drunk Davey earned his name for what it's worth at some point in history, Megan. I'm just saying for the record, it didn't come out of nowhere. Every 10 shows, we do a quick retrospective of the past 10 shows, and this is our 50th episode, which is kind of a big deal. And so here is a list of episodes 41 through 50, the classics that we've done for the past 10 episodes. And it started out with a big one with Casablanca here from 1943, and now our 50th is from 1942. So a lot of big films in that list, Davey.
Some real big ones like Will Penny.
Well, Will Penny may not be big to the audience, but it's actually our second biggest show of all time, strangely enough. It's monumental to us. And all these classics are doing pretty well in the show. Last Emperor is breaking some records for us. Mrs. Miniver's doing really well. Hair you didn't even bother doing.
No, I didn't.
Megan, have you seen any of the films on this list?
Mostly no.
What is the unmostly?
Casablanca, part of it.
Only part of it.
Part of it?
We might have to loan you the rest of it. Davey, if you had to recommend one film to Megan aside from Casablanca on this list, what would it be?
I would say Mrs. Miniver, I guess. Mrs. Miniver.
Mrs. Miniver, okay. That's another one of our 1942 films. That's the film that beat Pride of the Yankees for Best Picture in 1942. So that'll be interesting if Megan decides to watch that, and she'll come back in the show possibly and tell us about her experience with Mrs. Miniver. This is our trivia tidbit that I said in the last episode about tonight's episode. I said it would be one of the Oscar winners from the last 1942 film Davey watched, returns for a different movie in which she was also nominated. That last 1942 film was indeed Mrs. Miniver, which featured both Greer Garson and Teresa Wright. Both of them won Academy Awards as Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress, respectively. Teresa Wright, of course, is also in Pride of the Yankees, and she was also nominated for that film, this time in the lead actress category against Greer Garson, and of course losing to Greer Garson. Teresa Wright, by the way, that would be 3 nominations for her first 3 films. She was nominated for Mrs. Miniver, Pride of the Yankees, and The Little Foxes in 1941. 3 Oscar nominations in her first 3 films. That's your trivia tidbit. That's kind of impressive, wouldn't you say, Megan?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. That's emphatic. I like that. Davey, any thoughts on that trivia tidbit?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
I knew that was coming, and I always fall for that. All right, guys, it's time for the summary. Pride of the Yankees. Lou Gehrig is a poor first-generation American boy growing up in New York City and dreaming of becoming a professional ball player. His mother doesn't believe it's a real occupation and pushes Louis into more serious vocations like engineering. But Lou's talent for hitting a baseball cannot be denied, and the New York Yankees come calling, starting one of the most prolific careers in the history of professional sports, albeit one that was cut short suddenly by a disease that would soon bear his name. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the summary for Pride of the Yankees. How do you feel about it, guys? How was the summary?
I feel that was pretty spot on.
Yeah.
David, you're okay with it?
Yeah. Good job, man.
Thanks, man. I like the positive reinforcement. I dig it. So it's time for opening thoughts. So we're about to dig into the discussion, and it's a sentence or two that gets us started. And the master of monosyllabic sentences is Drunk Davey. So, Davey?
Yeah, I'd say for a movie that hits such an emotional high or low, it's really boring.
So that was actually usually a longer sentence than he usually gives. So bonus words from Davey tonight in the opening thoughts. Megan, sentence or two.
I'm actually kind of glad that that's how you opened. I am not, as you know, JB, I am in no way, shape, or form knowledgeable in anything football related, nor mostly classic movies. So this was like really like a swing and a miss for me. I think they spent a lot of time on the romance of it all, though, and that was pretty touching. But it was long.
And it's baseball, by the way. You did call it football.
Did I really? See?
So, I mean, I just wanted to clarify before we got too much.
I wore a football hat for it. See?
Yeah. So before we went too far down the football road, I thought we should just course correct real quick. And Davey, what does that put in the Davey scale for you?
I mean, I'm gonna say it's brutal. I will say it's too bright. The thing is that comes from a movie that I really liked.
That's the irony of it all, yes. As Megan may not realize, but these films come from the screenings that I do. Megan's been to the screenings that I have here in LA, so she knows a little bit what I'm talking about. That inspires what films we're going to review on the show. And I've screened this a couple times. First on December 19th, 2012 in New York, and then again as a part of my prep for the 1942 in Review show. I rewatched it on February 20th of this year. The NYC crowd liked it a lot more. The flaws stood out a lot more to the LA crowd. And David, do you have any recollection about what I said about Pride of the Yankees on the 1942 in Review show that you watched?
No, God, no.
Great. Yeah, he doesn't listen to me. I do own it, by the way. So I am something of a fan. I'm going to come somewhere down in the middle between the LA crowd and the New York crowd. I think it's a very flawed film that packs one hell of an emotional punch. Yeah. And I think that dichotomy is best represented in our first topic, which is performances. I want to dig into performances first because I do think that, I don't want to say performances in general, but a performance is the best thing about this movie. And if this movie is any good in my estimation, it's because of the presence of Teresa Wright as Eleanor Twitchell, who would become Eleanor Gehrig. The movie plods along until her first appearance. As soon as she utters the word Tanglefoot, the movie practically flies from there. I feel like it's a whole different movie. And to Megan's point, it becomes a movie about a love story. Her charm has a lot to do with it for sure, but more than any other character in the movie, Eleanor Twitchell Gehrig seems like a real person. She's extremely natural and at ease on screen, and she also makes some surprisingly effective choices. One that I called out on the 1942 in Review show is when she asks, when is Lou going to die, in a way that is surprisingly reserved. No histrionics. She just committed to this idea, and it was a surprising choice for a movie that old. Those of you who watched the 1942 in Review may remember that when asked who should have won the Oscar for Best Actress this year, I said it was this performance. It doesn't hurt that Teresa Wright is my third favorite actress of all time, despite not having as large a career as some of the other ones like Ginger Rogers. Teresa Wright, I think, makes this movie, almost every good moment in this movie is because of her. Megan, am I off base?
No, I agree. I mean, I think it was their interaction, which was, they had this little combative thing, and she would poke his buttons, and it was fun. It was interesting. It's not what you expect out of a film of its time, I think, or at least not what I expected.
Davey, Teresa Wright?
She was good. I think that you're absolutely right about the scene with the doctor. To me, that's when the movie really takes off, is when he starts to get sick. Up until then, I kind of leaves me a little cold.
First hour and a half of the movie.
You also hate love stories.
The last 20 minutes, I think, are pretty great. The love stories, it's good. I don't know. It's not memorable to me.
Well, I mean, my issue with the love story is when I talk about the dichotomy of the movie, I talk about the flip side, and that's Gary Cooper, who, in spite of his 2 Academy Award wins, I've been very critical of him in the past. And this movie's no different. I think he's a terrible actor, and that's true in this movie. Now, he's right for the role of Lou Gehrig for a couple of reasons. There is a resemblance, enough so that real-life photos and clippings of Lou Gehrig are strewn throughout the movie without anybody noticing. And also, Gary Cooper spent most of his career playing morally sound men who aren't the brightest bulbs, which was true of Lou Gehrig. And the way he plays him like a kind bumpkin is sort of how his teammates and colleagues and Eleanor saw him, meaning Lou Gehrig. So even though Coop is famous for this kind of role, he still does it poorly. He communicates Lou's simple nature with external stock movements of hemming and hawing, shoulder-shrugging giggles and eye rolls. While he looks the part, he doesn't carry himself like a ball player. His baseball scenes are atrocious, and thankfully there aren't too many of them. I thought Megan would appreciate the fact that there aren't too many of them. People give him credit for the final speech, which, to Davey's point, the final speech is very effective. It's a famous speech, but the credit for that speech really goes to Lou Gehrig, because all Gary Cooper did is really imitate Lou Gehrig's famous speech there. Right. Gary Cooper isn't a good actor. It doesn't detract too much from the movie for me, but when it comes to romance scenes, I fall in love with her, and that's what keeps me interested in the movie for the first hour and a half that bored Davey. Megan, you're an actor. Tell me, am I off on Gary Cooper?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he was putting on a character from the beginning, but you just kind of, after 2 hours of it, I think you adopt that character, and like he kind of fell to the wayside for me. I wasn't so offended by his performance, I guess, as it went on, because there was so much else going on to a degree, as you've mentioned, with bringing in these, charismatic female characters and watching the journey and knowing, of course, where it's going to go.
So yeah. And then, but as far as the romance is concerned, I feel like I'm invested because of her.
Right.
David, you didn't feel that?
I thought it was kind of cute, but no, I guess I didn't get as wrapped up in it as you did. And as far as Gary Cooper, I mean, I don't think the performance is bad. I just think that he's not believable as a 42-year-old man playing a 18-year-old. It's just utterly ridiculous, and it's hard to get past.
And that's why the 20 minutes and final 20 minutes work, because he was finally playing the right age, more or less.
Right, and he maybe it's just because if you're a baseball fan and just kind of into the history of it, it's just hard to watch. It's hard to see. It's such a sad thing that happened, And
I might be a sucker for this movie because I went to Yankee Stadium, and Megan, our mutual friend Tiff, was with us, and she mocked me endlessly because I cried at the monument. There's a monument outside Yankee Stadium that says, "I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth," and I started to cry, and everybody made fun of me. So I might be a sucker for this movie. I'm acknowledging.
Your ensemble speaks for itself.
Yeah, exactly. Fair enough. So there's a couple other performances in this movie that I wanted to mention, and maybe you guys will mention some as well. But Walter Brennan, who plays Sam Blake, the sports writer, he is a good actor. He's a 3-time Oscar winner. And this is the 3rd consecutive movie he did supporting Gary Cooper, and there'd be many more. He was like Gary Cooper's guy. Still, there's this element of Brennan in this movie almost phoning it in. His characters in his movies with Cooper all seem to be variations on a theme, variations on himself potentially. He makes them compelling enough, but he doesn't feel like he's really building a 3-dimensional person. But ultimately, screenplay-wise, Sam Blake is there just to move the story along, and Brennan does that job, but without adding any extra elements. Brennan's story is sort of famous. He's a former extra, a background actor that rose through the ranks to be a 3-time Oscar winner. So perhaps he was in the mode of just doing your job and going home. It did not feel like Sam Blake was a person. It felt like he was a device to move the plot along. Davey, anything on Walter Brennan?
Maybe you're being a bit hard on him. I thought he was good, but some of the writing around his character isn't the best either. So it's hard to.
Oh, that's funny. I mean, I have a note later where I think the dialogue is strong with them.
The scene in the car when.
Oh, I like the banter between the 2 sports writers is what I mainly meant.
Okay. I don't know. I didn't think he was bad, but I just think that, I don't know. I think maybe the script just isn't that strong, and it's hard to work with.
All right, we'll get to that. Megan, anything on Walter Brennan?
Well, I mean, guess kind of piggybacking a little bit off of what you were saying, I feel like that car scene was the sharp right turn they tried to make with that character and give him some sort of an opinion and lead the plot astray for a moment, and then it's like, oh, I'm just kidding. He's still just coasting.
It's one of my notes about the screenplay is the number of strange asides. Like there's a number of times when like we're heading in a direction and we'd just have like almost to be cute. Like I don't know what the purpose of certain scenes were. I'll point them out later, but that's certainly one of them. The car scene where they go to watch him umpire was certainly like a strange, worthless.
I can tell you exactly what it's about. It's Lou Gehrig was not a particularly interesting guy.
Except for the last 2 weeks of his life.
Yeah,
or something.
and there were interesting things that they just didn't want to get into. They could have gotten into the fact that he and Babe Ruth didn't like each other.
And the reason why they didn't like each other is because Eleanor had an affair with him before she met Lou. Before Lou was a major leaguer, she had an affair with him in the teens and 20s. She had an affair with Babe Ruth.
Is that official? I mean, is that?
I didn't hear it from Eleanor's mouth, but no, that is discussed as the likely scenario.
I heard it was more issues with Babe Ruth's, his wife, and her daughter, and the way they interacted with.
Lou's mother had an issue with the way they raised their daughter. Lou's mother is a lot worse in real life than she is in the film, supposedly. At one point, Lou's mother was banned from the house. And here she just gets a stern talking to. In real life, she was not allowed in Eleanor's house. There was a lot of more drama there. The problem here is it's too recent. They made this movie the year after he passed. So it was extremely recent. Talk about the mother. Just want to mention Elsa Jansen, who gives a decent performance as Lou's mother. The screenplay is awkward as far as she's concerned because she sort of evolved into comic relief. Now, those scenes were sometimes amusing. As I mentioned, Christina Gehrig was actually much, much worse of an overbearing mother and was not really a funny character at all. But the screenwriters dialed back and found a balance between an unhealthy affection for her child and some enjoyable comic moments. It seems like a wide pendulum, but I give her credit for achieving the difficult task that the screenwriters set out for her.
That close to the death of her son, what are you going to do?
It's almost like the documentary that we just watched, for the episode 3 days ago, The Square. I mean, it was such recent history, there's no perspective on it.
It's not just that there's no perspective on it, it's the wound is so raw. I mean, you can't honestly, it'd be difficult to just go rub salt in it. No one's gonna want to watch that anyway. So I think it's
at least at the time, you mean?
Yeah, I think so. I think now it'd be interesting
to see the affair between Babe and Eleanor. Anything on Elsa Jansen, Megan?
I was a little bit uncomfortable with the relationship between Lou and his mother. Like, I understand there's like a time, like a difference just in cultural.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, uncomfortable in the sense that, do you felt like there was some like Oedipus?
Yeah, and they leaned in a lot to this like obsessive mother quality or this like overly affectionate thing, which again, I just kind of checked myself.
And it's funny you say that because actually in reality, they dialed it back. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
Because I've got this book. I should pull this out now. This book just came out. And I guess I'm recommending it. It is just came out last year for the 75th anniversary of the film, about the making of the film and the comparisons between what real life was like and how the movie depicted it. Christina Gehrig was Lou's best gal, as they say in the movie, for many, many years. Eleanor and Lou were only married for 8 years before he passed. He lived with his mother in the years before that. Eleanor officially is sort of one of the first women he ever dated. The mom blamed Lou's ALS on Eleanor's cooking.
Oh, God. That's evil.
Well, it's ignorant is what it is, I think, ultimately. And to be honest, I'm not as bad as Lou is, but my mom's certainly as bad as Christina is. To your point, Megan, Lou keeps that door open. It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I think this probably harkens back a little bit to what we were saying earlier, though, just generally about how old he as an actor was playing him in his formative years. So we see that as a kid, but we're actually seeing a grown-ass man.
Yeah.
Coming on his mama and then keeps doing it.
The optics of that, I acknowledge. Being someone that watches a lot more classic films and watched, how many did I watch now? 65, 66 films from 1942 specifically. I guess maybe I was a little more forgiving of the age thing. Like that was more of a common practice, especially with a big star like Gary Cooper, trying to insert him into the film as quickly as possible. Like I get that. Performance-wise, before we move on to other things, is there other performances in the film that you wanted to mention? Maybe any of the real-life players? Anything I didn't cover performance-wise? I just sort of highlighted a couple.
I thought Babe Ruth was pretty smooth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And also Bill Dickey, who's a real-life player. has some of the bigger moments. He knocks out another player in the locker room in a very convincing way. So the real life players, I think, acquitted themselves pretty well.
You got to give the director some props for that, I think, because that can't be completely natural.
I don't know. He's one of the worst directors in cinema history, and we'll get to that later on. Maybe you guys will think differently, but I mean, someone I tend to dislike. Let's move on to the screenplay. The big choice that I like is emphasizing character and the love story instead of the baseball accomplishments. I feel like that made the film more relatable and accessible to all. Lou Gehrig is one of the greatest players ever to play the game, but yet that's not really a part of Pride of the Yankees. They mention maybe in passing his streak. We don't see very much baseball at all. I mean, and that's good because Gary Cooper couldn't hit a baseball to save his life, probably. There was an emphasis on how Lou grew and how his relationship grew with Eleanor. Like, that's what the film is about. And so it earns its last 20 minutes by focusing on the characters and their relationships. I like that decision made early on in the screenplay phase. Would you prefer to see a more baseball-centric movie that focused on his achievements? Would that have been more interesting to you? And you said it was boring.
Yeah, it would have been more interesting to me. Looking back on it, I mean, like, after he just died, I mean, I feel like you probably need to make a more sentimental film, right?
Let's not worry about the context. I understand why maybe that choice was made, but now, 76 years later, the question is, what would have made the better movie?
I would, if you're not going to go into the actual true relationships, then baseball it up.
Megan, I imagine you might have a different tack on that.
Yeah, I absolutely. Just simply, I don't think it was really a baseball story. It's about a person who is a baseball legend, but it's more about his death than anything. I mean, that's really what happens in the movie. So I guess if you were to put more baseball in there, it's almost a little misleading. Like, it's not about a team's rise, through the ranks, or like a single person. Like, it was his come up story shortly all the way through the decline of his life. So I don't know if it necessarily would have served the version of the story we saw, but maybe, yeah, they could have gone a little bit deeper with the reality of what was going on had it not been so short after his death.
Right. And I mean, I would, because he was famous for his work ethic. His nickname is the Iron Horse. His working was done in like quick montage. So you didn't really get that impact of how hard he worked. It's just sort of talked about and glossed over. That's the one element of baseball that I would have liked to maybe see a little bit more of. I don't want to agree with Davey because I don't. I would say that's the one element that it might have been nice to get a sense of, because, I mean, one of the hardest parts about being a baseball player is the work-life balance. Lou Gehrig in particular was unique amongst baseball players because baseball players were generally a rowdy bunch. His gentlemanly ways and boyish ways, almost immature ways, was very unique amongst that set of people.
Yes, I agree. I think that what they did was they spent a lot of time on the build-up, like a lot of time with him at the fraternity and things that they revisited a few too many times, whereas they could have left some of that room open to see a little bit more of the world that happened prior to his passing. Because then I think it got overshadowed with the wedding or the marriage, and then just kind of beeline to the door.
I mean, I almost wish they'd started with meeting Eleanor like sooner, because she comes in maybe at the 30-minute mark or something. I do want to say that I did like a lot of the dialogue, and this is true of a lot of the 1942 films. Like, I really enjoy some of the snappy dialogue in a lot of scenes, and it's one of the best screenwriters ever. We've talked about Joseph Mankiewicz in the past when we didn't review All About Eve, but it certainly has come up in previous conversations. All About Eve, possibly one of the best screenplays ever. We did review Cleopatra, which Mankiewicz also wrote. That's not his strongest work. Davey's face was hilarious. At the same time, Mankiewicz certainly knows how to write dialogue, and it's sharply funny at times. I enjoyed the banter between the two sports writers, as I mentioned. I enjoyed the parents learning baseball, those little moments about the comic moments as they learn the sport. I think some of the dialogue is touchingly poignant. I think that their dancing date, their fourth time out in a row or something, early on in their courtship, I thought was really sweet. And then there's this line midway through where he's like, we've never been on a honeymoon. And then she's like, well, we've had nothing else. We've really had nothing but a honeymoon. And I think that really landed for me as a unique line and also a very powerful one. So those are some examples of dialogue I liked. Dave, you seem to disagree with my thoughts on dialogue.
I mean, I think the dialogue is fine. The dialogue is the strength of the script, because the story is just kind of it's just waiting for him to get sick.
I guess I'll get to that structurally, because they're the main issue that they're struggling with as screenwriters. And if you really think about it, they did a great job, given that there's no real conflict up until he gets sick. So drama is conflict, and there's very little to be had. And I think we bored Megan to death because she's not there.
Oh no, I just had to get the charger. Sorry.
It's okay.
And plan this well.
You're on camera. We're just gonna hold on this empty frame. So should we time her how long it takes her to get the? There, she's back. Megan, anything on the dialogue?
Voila.
I have nothing that comes to mind right off the jump. I mean, I do, as I said before, I think that the relationship with Lou and Eleanor, like there was some fun, interesting banter there. I kind of glossed over a lot of the sports commentator stuff, so I believe you that it was fun.
Your eyes just like glazed over. It was just like, I'm done.
It was like, okay, and then I'm back in. Like you just kind of blank stare for a second.
Wow. Do you want to like try to like understand what they're saying?
I tried. I actively tried. It was a 2-hour movie, so I tried.
Remind me not to take you to a baseball game at some point. Right. So the other thing that I thought was interesting was the tone in the screenplay. There's a balance between the comedy and the drama, but sometimes veering into unnecessary saccharine. I mean, I don't love Billy, the kid in the hospital. I like how he reappears at the end a little bit, but that scene in the hospital is folklore, and it drives me crazy. It feels very over the top to me. I question the watering down of anything controversial, like the things we've talked about, the issues with his mother, Eleanor's history with Babe Ruth. I guess you can't put it in there. Ultimately, it's a love letter from Lou's wife to Lou vis-a-vis the screenwriters. There's no edge. There's no conflict. And that's one of the big flaws to the movie. Megan?
I agree completely. I mean, there was a lot of just romantic things, not necessarily even just in the relationship, but like the scene where they're out to dinner and you watch the dance sequence, the waltz or whatever it was for however long. Like they spent a lot of time making this beautiful.
And the reason for that is they're two famous dancers. So they got people into the theaters because there's a scene featuring these two famous Spanish dancers.
Right. And
that was pretty common, for what it's worth, to have sort of an interlude, a dance interlude featuring famous dancers. There was a lot of movies that featured that. So that wasn't that strange to an audience from 1942. But I certainly take your point. We talked about a little bit of the lack of conflict. They try to do something with maternal conflict in the beginning, but that fizzles and becomes a joke. The disease at the end is the only real conflict. I mean, I almost want to give them credit for managing to tell a 2-hour and 5-minute story with so little meat on the bone.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, they do it. I don't know that I need to give them any credit for it. It was boring.
Look, you know how the studio system works. These screenwriters were hired to do a job.
No, I get it.
On assignment, they're like, here, write this movie. They're like, what do we do with this?
All those little side things, it's just them trying to
fill time,
get to a feature length.
I wish it was something different. We already talked about the red herring with his umpiring for kids and like the pretending like that Lou would ever have an affair, like so random and strange. I think Megan mentioned this, the college hazing sequence. It was unnecessary.
Completely unnecessary. And I think totally detracted from the character they were trying to build us up to. Because the scene where he dives over the table and the whole like the trickery at the beginning with the girl asking him to dance and getting all the intel.
I mean, I liked looking at that girl. Don't get me wrong. She was very attractive.
She's too old for me.
Oh, she's too old for me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Forgot my birthday.
No, I didn't. I texted you the next day.
After I reminded you.
Yeah. I remembered.
It's okay, Davey forgot my birthday too, so it's all right. All right, real quickly on direction. I don't like Sam Wood as a director. I've said this a few times in the show. Certainly in the 1942 in review show, he came up because he directed not only this film but another Best Picture nominee from that year called King's Row. He is a major hack who made major films. All the films would have been a lot better if someone else had directed them. I'm talking about King's Row, Kitty Foyle, For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is a Hemingway film that also features Gary Cooper. In this particular film, the thing that bothered me are the forced details. There's a lot of things that are awkward about this movie. The wedding that kept getting interrupted by workers, it felt like he was forcing a way to make the wedding more interesting. So the guy's drill goes off. Somebody walks through with a wheelbarrow. Also, the little random girl checking for Lou's homecoming. Not yet. He's not coming in yet. And the doll and the puzzle Teresa Wright has when she's cheering for Lou in the World Series. Like, what is going on? Like, what is she a 12-year-old? She's a grown woman that's already had sex with Babe Ruth at this point. The mise-en-scène in that sequence is so random. Like, why does she have that, like, why is he portraying her as this young child when that's not the case? And then I think about the egregiously over-the-top moments. The reactions to the 2-home run thing with Billy in the hospital saying things like whoopee, which even in 1942 was awkward and over the top. The frat fight that was just alluded to where he jumps over the table, really strange and over the top, not just from a screenplay perspective. The blocking was weird. So guys, am I being too harsh on Sam Wood, or do you see what I'm trying to say here?
I see it. I mean, I think it's all stuff that we've touched on to some degree. And if the fault lies in the hands of the director, the fault lies in the hands of the director.
I keep trying to cut the man some slack because I just don't. It's just not. There's nothing there. I mean, I agree. Like all that stuff in the wedding is stupid.
Those details are not script stuff. That's director stuff.
He's trying to tease something interesting out of that. He's doing his best.
Your lesson as a director then is it's better not to force awkward things, rather let it lie than force awkward things into it just for the sake of your own ego.
You need the movie to be something, or you end up with boys.
In fairness, I've got a history with Sam Wood. I have a hatred coming in.
Can you give me a modern day director that you would compare him to?
Joel Schumacher?
Boom. Okay, I get it. All right.
Are you excited that I had one ready for you?
That's so great that you did. I had it in my head that you would too. So
the one credit I will give him is I do think that the way he handled Lou's last game, and you talked about the last 20 minutes being great. Lou's last game was very well staged. The reactions, Lou on the bench, Babe Dahlgren warming up from Lou's perspective, just with a bench in the foreground, and then Lou lowering his slightly. You see the Yankees logo, and then a fade out. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut at some point, and that's a scene for Sam Wood's reel if he ever needed one.
That was great. It was just a great. Once I hate saying it this way, but once he gets sick, the movie is just riveting. I
would even say, like the moments leading up, once I think from the end of the wedding onward is where it started picking up for me, because I think there was that understanding that we knew that eventually he was going to get sick and everything was going to go to shit. So it was like now I was coming down and ready for it to happen. I do think that was a great scene. I think they spent a little bit of time. I don't remember exactly when it was that it happened, but there was like a long shot of him just walking through the long space.
Leading up to the speech, the 4th of July speech.
I guess that was necessary. I don't know. It seemed a little stagnant for me.
It's a famous speech. Did you know it was coming, Megan? I know Davey did.
No. I mean, I assumed because it was fairly silent other than like the radio.
That speech was word for word, and it's certainly audiences of the time. Some of them would have had it memorized. The real-life speech played in newsreels, and he had just died 11 months before, so it was fairly fresh in the memory of audiences. They knew it was coming, and hence the long walk for the build-up to it. Like, I understand that choice, certainly of the time. So that'll bring us to Davey's another segment that Davey hates because he struggles with it so mightily. Davey, you know what that is?
The themes.
The T word. He doesn't like to say the word themes normally, but he sucked it up and did it then. David doesn't think movies have themes generally, but he's generally wrong. But I had a harder time with this one, Davey, because there's so little meat on this bone. But here's a couple themes that I came up with for this movie, and you guys can confirm or deny. The first is heroism, suggesting potentially that it's not like there's no argument that Lou Gehrig is a hero to the American people of the time, but it's not his baseball accomplishments that made him a hero. I think the film suggests it's how he carried himself when accomplishing these goals, especially when compared to someone like Babe Ruth, who is known for his poor off-the-field behavior. Guys, how do you feel about heroism and the nature thereof as a theme? Davey? I guess that's how he feels about that. Megan?
Let me actually answer the question. I think you're right. The scene with the kid in the hospital, and then when he comes back, it's like them hitting you over the head with it. He was a hero to this kid.
I mean, yes, that makes sense to me. I feel like the whole movie was an in memoriam piece, so I think regardless of any of his accomplishments, he would have been a hero.
A long eulogy. Based on your knowledge of the American history, do you feel like he's still a hero, either of you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, why?
I think there's something to be said for a guy that played the game as well as he did and didn't have any of the flash and didn't. And it's not just that he stayed out of trouble. It's that he never really he didn't talk a whole lot. He didn't do a lot of he didn't call a lot of attention to himself, which is, I think.
And the sports writers of the Times disliked it. They said they didn't like him as a player because he lacked personality.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting to me.
I think that's kind of the blue collar thing, like the everyman thing.
What are you saying? He is an everyman, or he's
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, I mean, he's the rags to riches story to some degree, and didn't fall into this fame spotlight trap,
Yeah.
Exactly, and maintained his like work ethic, where I come here to work, and this isn't a show, this isn't a party, it's my job, and I love it, and which sure can be heroic in its own way, I guess.
Especially if you inspire other people. You know what I mean? If you inspire other people to do things that they see what you've accomplished in spite of great odds, and they feel like maybe me too, maybe I can do something too, even if it's not baseball. If you inspire people, you're a hero, at least to them. And I think Davey tried to say that in not as good a way.
Yeah, and I think you set a good example.
The other offshoot theme that I had, and it's a little trickier, I suppose, is related to existentialism and romance. So follow me here for a second, suggesting that perhaps it's the companionship that we find that makes life worth living, even if it's not the full-term life. The time here on Earth is not about what we do, but who we spend it with. Given the film's focus on the relationship, it almost makes it seem for Eleanor, the 8 years that they had was well worth it, in spite of losing him at the age of 37. Is that a crazy thought, Megan?
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think it was probably a similar feeling on his end. I mean, that's why he was so clearly trying to shelter her from the information so she could enjoy the last of her days with him. And she obviously figured that out on her own and continued to not tell him. So it was this like mutual respect.
That made for some great drama, and the great scene where she lures him out to tie his bow tie for him when he's struggling to tie his own tie. That's a great cinematic moment. I give some more credit there. I would say that I just want to point out that in real life, Lou had no idea, at least he didn't publicly acknowledge that he was dying. No one told. It was the reverse. Eleanor and the real life Sam, whose real name is John Kieran, they knew he was dying and had 2 years to live. He did not. They kept it from him instead of the other way around. For what it's worth.
Why make that the climactic moment of the movie? Why tell that story if it's completely the opposite of what happened? It's like not even a biopic at that point. It's just fictionalizing this poor guy's life.
Well,
sorry he's dead. It could have been this way.
It worked dramaturgically because I like that scene where they both know but they don't. Like I do think that made for more compelling. At least it was only a real scene where it was compelling. But
it makes him seem like more of a hero because he's trying to spare her.
Yeah. Davey, existential and romance. You hate romance.
Do I hate romance? Is that?
Like how on the show of Adrift, you said the love story for the girls is what you called it.
That is not an accurate quote. Something about they needed to service the demographic of the film that they were going after, and it wasn't us. And I stand by that.
Existential and romance.
I'm still reeling from what you told me, so I think that really hits home. Then you're absolutely right that they switched the story at the end.
Are there other themes that you guys took from the movie that I didn't mention out of those two? Like, is there other themes or lessons, or did anything hit home for you guys that maybe I haven't articulated yet?
No, I mean, you do such a good job, man.
That's him being lazy. That's not him being nice. Granted, you are incredibly thorough, JB, and I think that the latter two parts of this conversation are kind of like about the whole thing. So attention to details.
Fair enough.
You're incredibly thorough, maybe even obnoxiously so.
Ouch. I see how it is. Well, I'll remember that next time that I try to help out with the call sheet, Megan.
I didn't even say that. So first of all,
punish her for what I said.
Megan, you've only made it to one of the screenings because you're so difficult to pin down. But do you remember the brackets?
No.
Okay, great. So I'll try to explain this. It's time for the Classic Movie Showdown. Two movies go head-to-head in NCAA-style brackets. So it's the same idea. And Davey will read the rules for you right now.
Seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. Films are shown at JB hosted screenings and need to be 15 years old or older. That's from 2003. Voters are eligible if they have seen both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see both films in JB's presence. JB is ineligible to vote unless the vote counts. He can break ties.
So the vote happens at the screenings. I have the screenings at my house, and invariably, people at the screenings have seen both two different films within a year that go against each other, and they have to choose between the two. You were here for the 7 screening, weren't you, Megan?
Yes.
Does this sound familiar now, the vote at the end?
Yeah, it's coming back.
Okay. Tonight we're doing the 40s bracket, which is a bracket of some of the best films of the 1940s, the whole decade in general. And Pride of the Yankees is a 15 seed in the 40s bracket. So, Davey, that means it goes up against a
2 seed.
A 2 seed. So it's a very high seed it goes up against. And as it happens, it's another one of our 1942 films, Pride of the Yankees versus Mrs. Miniver, a rematch of the Best Picture race of 1942. So again, the vote already happens, but I will let Davey opine. I don't think Megan's seen it, but we'll find out. I screened Mrs. Miniver 3 times. We just reviewed the show in episode 47.3, so just 3 episodes ago. I've screened it on July 18th, 2012, July 6th, 2016, and February 23rd, 2018. At some point, Pride of the Yankees went up against Mrs. Miniver. Megan, I did mention it to you a long time ago. Did you watch Mrs. Miniver by chance?
Nope.
Didn't think so. It was a long shot. It would be a bonus if you did. Davey had to watch it for a previous episode, so he can vote here. His vote won't count because it's already been decided, but if you were a voter, Davey, what would you have chosen?
Mrs. Miniver.
Mrs. Miniver. Davey, tell me why.
You know, Mrs. Miniver was at the beginning of the Second World War, and there's tension there, and it's just a lot more engaging film than Pride of the Yankees, at least for the duration of the film. Pride of the Yankees, to me, is a really long slog with 20 really compelling minutes at the end.
Okay, and Mrs. Miniver, for what it's worth, is the one film that you recommended to Megan out of our last 10 shows.
Yeah, Casablanca would be the one that I would recommend.
Right. Well, I'm going to see her on set this week, so I'm going to bring Casablanca over to her and make that happen. Her assignment, if she wants another job, and we've got a job coming up in Las Vegas at the end of the month. So she wants to go. She has to watch Casablanca. That's the rule. She didn't even want to be on the show, David. She's following orders by even being here.
Yeah, right.
So Davey votes for Mrs. Miniver. Let's see what the voters picked. The winner is, ladies and gentlemen, Pride of the Yankees with the upset. So Davey's a little upset. Pride of the Yankees wins. The voting group was the group that was the most critical of Mrs. Miniver. Their response was the sweetness and heart of the Pride of the Yankees made them pick that movie. And there was a time where I might have agreed with them. I do love this movie, but certainly watching all the films of 1942, Mrs. Miniver became more compelling to me and Pride of the Yankees less. They're both in my top 20 of 1942. I think Mrs. Miniver is like 12 or 13 and Pride of the Yankees like 15, somewhere in there. I do think it's a good movie. I think it falls short of being a great movie, and Mrs. Miniver is slightly better, I would agree. But it's closer for me than it is for you, Davey. But Pride of the Yankees does move on to the second round.
That is absurd.
Megan, are you all curious about Mrs. Miniver at this point?
I am. You've created a very heated debate amongst this anonymous group of voters and Davey.
There you go.
Yeah, you get it wrong like 9 times out of 10. It's amazing.
Davey, now you've been to one screening, so you've seen it happen. You know, were you angry at that screening?
I don't remember what I know that it was Coal Miner's Daughter. What did it go against?
Actually, I don't remember what it went up against.
You don't remember?
Wow.
All right, jeez. Probably something in the Best Actress category or something.
I'm just shaken that you don't remember.
After all my thoroughness, you threw me a curveball and I let you down. Is that what this is all about?
That was a baseball reference, wasn't it?
Not a football reference. So now we're all on the same page as we're about to close the show. All right, closing thoughts. Davey.
You know, I'm disappointed in the people that you invite to your screenings.
Well, maybe Megan will come to future screenings and help set the wrongs right again.
She would have gotten it right. She would have gotten it right. I believe in her.
Thanks, Davey.
Megan, closing thoughts.
Yeah. Glad to have watched it. Don't feel a need to watch again. Glad for the discussion as always. And I will learn more about football in the coming days.
Great.
Or South, whatever.
Now that you've been on the show, do you feel excited to watch future other shows?
Yeah. I'll watch a few.
Our next classic is going to be later this month, and it's the surprise hit of 1999 that got 6 Oscar nominations but 0 wins. That's your trivia tidbit for our next classic that'll be coming up at the end of August. Our next show, however, is coming up in just a few days. This upcoming Monday, August 13th, we got our Sound Off, our freeform segment, our 34th Sound Off. I'm going to introduce a new segment. Alex Evans will be here with us, and he's going to do a second run, and I will count down my top 5 sports biopics. So we'll see if Pride of the Yankees makes that list, and we'll see that on Monday. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.